Today we're going to continue looking at 1 Peter, and we are in chapter 3. We're going to continue looking at 1 Peter chapter 3. As you know, as we've looked at the last few weeks, the first 6 verses deal with with women and their relationship to their husbands. And in this next verse, we're looking at verse 7, it talks about man and men's relationship to, actually it talks about men's relationship to women in general. It talks about specifically your wife, but the same principles would apply to a man relating to women in general. Before we do that though, there have been some terms that have been created by certain powers and political groups in our nation. I stay away from politics because I think we've got something much more important we're involved in, and that's eternal. But there have been certain political forces that are trying to silence Christian voices, and so they come up with these terms, and then they talk snidely about those terms to try and silence people. And one of those terms is a Christian nationalism. Have you heard that term? Ooh, you don't want to be a Christian nationalist. You're a Christian nationalist. Bad you. What does that mean? What is a Christian nationalist? Let me just tell you what a Christian nationalist is. You can just Google it yourself. But here's what it says when it comes up. Christian nationalism. Let's go see if we've got any other evil Christian nationalists in our comp here this morning. We'll chase you right out with pitchforks. A Christian nationalism is a political ideology that seeks to fuse Christian and national identity. I don't really know what that means. Whatever. Anyway. Now, though it's not an official sect or denomination, here's what they believe. All right, do you believe this? They believe, these evil people, adherents generally believe that the United States was founded as a Christian nation. Ooh, bad people. And it gets worse. And that the laws and institutions should reflect Christian values. Ooh. You mean like no stealing? You mean like no killing? You mean like no adultery that destroys families and marks children's, it brings hurt and pain? Stuff like that? Or you mean like integrity? Things of that nature, Christian values? That's what Christian nationalism is. If you don't know that this nation was founded by Christians as a Christian nation, you're sadly ignorant. Just go read some of their things. In fact, one of the founders said, you have to rule by either the Bible or bayonet. And what he meant by that is if you don't have, and many of them said things along this line, if you don't have a people who are a moral people, democracy is doomed to fail. Because, and as I said, if you don't have a moral fabric in your nation, then eventually the people will vote into power the one that promised them the most goodies, and eventually they will bankrupt the public chest, the public finances. You can't imagine that happening in a country, can you? And that's been the problem when we have gone into other countries and tried to establish a democracy in other nations. Without a moral people's, democracy is doomed to fail. It's just the way it is. And we've tried to go into other nations. And the thing is, the idea of this Christian nationalism is the idea that the people who are fighting it don't realize that we are so ingrained with a Christian philosophy in our nation that they don't even realize, well, for example, women's rights. That's a Christian philosophy. The fact that women are treated with dignity. In Rome, they didn't treat women with dignity. In Greece, they didn't treat women. No other nation throughout all of history or around the world today. In Islamic nations, women treated with equality. Hindu nations, in African cultures, it's a Christian philosophy. And so they fight against the Christian philosophy, not realizing that their premises are based on Christian philosophy. It's the Christian philosophy that treated women with dignity. It's the Christian philosophy that is tolerance of people who think differerly, that you don't just go out and whack their head off. It's all a Christian philosophy. Our nation is one that's based upon what we typically call the Judeo-Christian philosophy. So Christian nationalism is simply saying that you know the principles of Scripture, love one another, be kind to one another, tolerate those who have different perspectives than you do, those are all Christian philosophies. And so, not rebel against your government, respect your leaders, those are all Christian philosophies. Romans, you find them throughout Scripture. So this idea of Christian nationalism, well, the only reason I'm saying that is there's another phrase, there's a lot of these terms. In fact, it comes, okay, I'll even get on to this. It comes straight from the progressive war manual, written back in the 40s, I believe, by Saul Alinsky. Check the book out, don't buy it, but it is worth checking it out at the library. It's the one Hillary Clinton wrote her, I think it was a master's thesis on, met with the guy many times. Saul Alinsky wrote a book called Rules for Radicals, How to Tear Down a Government. The book was dedicated to Lucifer, because Lucifer was the first man that we know of who was successful in undermining and tearing down a structure, so much so that he managed to gain his own kingdom. Wow, wasn't that a success? And Saul himself said, I hope to go to hell because that's where all my people are. Yeah. Well, I think in 72 he died, and I wonder what his opinion is now. But the point is, this book, one of the things they say in there, it's a good read, it's an interesting read. If you want to know what our president is doing now, go read The Art of the Deal, just the first 2 or 3 chapters, and you'll go, that's exactly what he's doing. If you want to know what the left is doing, go read Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky. And one of the things he says is, mock your opponents. You mock them, and they will draw back, and they won't be vocal. They'll sit back and they'll just hide because they don't want to be mocked. Isn't that exactly what happens? And so they mock us with Christian nationalism. You're a Christian nationalist. You really believe that the 10 Commandments should govern our nation? Well, it would be a good place to start, you know? Even if you wanted to skip the first 2 and just get down to don't kill people, don't steal from people, don't lie to people, be honest. Wouldn't that be unique in government? Anyhow, all right. Now you know why I don't go here very much. I get on to the, okay, so I don't go here very often, so when I'm here, let me take advantage of it. But the other one, and the one that applies to what we're talking about today, is this term toxic masculinity. What is toxic masculinity? Well, it's nothing new. It's what we used to call machismo. Macho, he's a macho man, you know. And I'm not talking about the song. He's a macho man, which means he uses his power to dominate. He uses his power not to protect, not to guard, not to serve, but to put himself in position. That's all toxic masculinity is, but it's a new terminology so that nobody really knows what you're talking about, okay? They never talk about toxic femininity either, but there is such a thing as toxic femininity. In the church, we sometimes hear it referred to as the Jezebel spirit. It's the woman who uses her influence to dominate. And so, but again, all of that is opposed to Christianity, that domination. But today, I do want to give some kudos and a hooyah to toxic masculinity. Because we're going to look at what biblical masculinity is, and you're going to find out that biblical masculinity is toxic. It is toxic to anyone that would pose a threat to his wife, to his children, to his family, to his home. And toxic simply means it's dangerous to, it's poisonous to. Biblical Christianity is toxic to anything that would threaten the sanctity of his marriage, which would include pornography. He's going to be deadly. He's opposed to pornography at all things. He would be opposed to adultery because it's detrimental and damaging to the sanctity of his marriage. So he's going to be toxic to adultery. He's not only going to keep his hands off women, he's going to keep his eyes and his mind off women that are not his wife. And so biblical Christianity is very toxic to things that destroy our soul and destroy our family and destroy morality. In fact, I was thinking about that this morning, Psalm 1 came to me. Psalm 101. I'm just going to read it to you because it is a definition of biblical toxic Christianity that is a threat to anything that would present a danger to his family, to the sanctity, to the righteousness of his people or his nation. It's a Psalm of David, who was a very toxic male to the enemies. He says, I will be careful to lead a blameless life. I will lead a life of integrity in my own home, not just outside, in my own home. I will refuse to look at anything vile and vulgar. I hate all who deal crookedly, and I will have nothing to do with them. I will reject perverse ideas and stay away from every evil. I will not tolerate people who slander their neighbors. I'm not going to get in that little neighborhood gossip group. I will not endure conceit and pride. I will search for faithful people, and they will be my companions. Only those who are above reproach will be allowed to serve me. I will not allow deceivers in my home. Every day I will put to silence those who practice lies. My daily task will be to ferret out the wicked and free the city of the Lord, to free the city of the people from the wicked's grasp. That's toxic to the enemies, but it's healthy and safe for the people of God. And so, we're going to talk today about biblical Christianity, biblical masculinity, knowing that it is toxic to the enemies and toxic. And our enemies today are not a political force, okay? Paul says this, we don't wrestle against flesh and blood. So if the person you're upset with, the person you're mad at is flesh and blood, you got the wrong target. You're shooting at the wrong target. I compare it to this. It's like if I were to put a little puppet up here and start calling you names, and you started throwing rocks at the puppet, you'd be missing the target. I'm the real problem over here. And that's exactly what's happening. Just like God uses people, the enemy uses people. And he just talks through them and does all his little thing through them. And if you spend all your time attacking them, he doesn't care. Because if you kill that one or remove that one, he's got a bucket full of more to put up there. You got to aim at the target. Our enemies are not flesh and blood. They are spiritual powers, forces, rulers of wickedness in the high places. And so there's my political speech. Let's look at 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 7. All right? Let's see if we can get it up here. 1 Peter 3:7. Now you husbands, in the same way, live with your wives in an understanding way, as with someone weaker, since she is a woman, and show her honor as a fellow heir of the grace of life, so that your prayers will not be hindered. I think it's interesting. As you know, we've looked at 1 Peter, we started, and the first 6 verses deal with instructions to women. And basically summing it up, he said, ladies, be submissive to your husbands. He said, ladies, let your adornment, let your beauty not come from outward things, but let your beauty come from that inner quiet, a gentle and a quiet spirit. And then the third thing he said is, don't be overcome by fear. How do you not be overcome by fear? Put your hope in God. Put your trust in God. So he basically gave, in 6 verses, he gave the ladies 3, 4, put your hope in God, points of instruction. Now, for the men, he gives us 1 verse. And I was thinking about this. I just see humor in pretty much everything. Janice said I look at the world like it's a cartoon. And I said, yeah, I guess I kind of do sometimes, But I was just thinking, here's Peter, and he's writing this down. God said, here, write this down, Peter. Now, that's not how they got the inspiration, obviously. But, you can see him writing it down. He says, wow, Lord, you gave me 6 verses for the women. You only gave me 1 verse for the guys. We must be doing pretty good, right?
But it's a long verse.
It is a long verse. And I was just thinking, he said, we must be doing pretty good, right? And the Lord kind of looked at him and goes, no, Peter. It's just you guys have such short attention spans. If I could get one thing across to you, I'm doing good. So anyway, guys, we've got 1 verse. You can memorize this one. In fact, by the time we're done with it, you might have it memorized. So it's just 1 verse there. And we're just going to kind of break it down and look at it a little bit and see what it has to say. And starting off, it just starts off like the same verse to the women. It says, in the same way. Start off, wives, in the same way. And by the in the same way, he's not referring back to what he said to the wives, but referring back to chapter 2. And in chapter 2, he focuses on the fact that we are to be submissive to our government, and we're to be submissive to employers in employment situations. In fact, Scripture says, submit ye one to another. So why? There's a point where even men, wives or husbands submit to their wives. It's this submission, it's this mutual submission that's always there. It's always honoring, always respecting, thinking more highly of others than we think of ourselves. And so there's this mutual submission. But ultimately, when it comes down to, you can only have one head. Anything with two heads is a monster. You only have one head. And so the Lord has said, men, you're the head. And wives, you're to be submissive to them. We're going to see what that means, though, more as we look at this. And so he says, in the same way, it's referring back to, again, that chapter 2, where it says, live lives of submission. In other words, we're not to be rebellious people. We're not to always be rising up and demanding our rights. You know, whenever you're demanding your rights, what rights do we have? You died with Christ. It's like a dead guy. What rights does he have? He can't stand up and say, hey, I don't want to be buried there. I want to be buried here. Shut up. We're going to put you where we want you. You know, you don't have any choice in this, right? We've sacrificed our rights when we become a believer. And when we're fighting for rights, every time we're demanding our rights, it should be a red flag indicator of an area of our life that we've not given the Lord control over. Well, I have a right to this. I have a right to that. I have a right to be happy. You haven't given the Lord control over that area of your life. And so, the point is that we have not to be a rebellious people. We are to be a submissive people. Submissive, first of all, to the rulership of the Lord Jesus Christ. And then we can submit to the government as long as it comes under his rulership. We can submit to any authority and leadership, employment, as long as it comes under his leadership first. But our first submission is to him. That's ultimate and that's priority. So we're to be a submissive, not a rebellious people. So that's what he's saying. Wives, in the same way, be submissive to your husbands. Men, in the same way, you are to live with your wives according to understanding. I'll quote the King James, because that's what I've kind of memorized. Live with your wives in an understanding way. So let's just look at that and break that down a little bit. First of all, live with your wife. Well, you think he's just saying you should share the same household, make sure you're under the same roof, and share the same bed and share the same table? It's much more than that. It's a lot more. It's a lot deeper than that. Think about this. Remember, Paul talks about how the husband-wife relationship is to reflect Christ and the church's relationship. Just like the Lord loved the church and gave himself for her, the husband is to love the wife and lay down his life for her. And in the same way as the church then honors and reverences Christ, the wife is to honor and reverence, submit to her husband. And so there's this relationship. So when he says, live with your wife according to understanding, live with your wife, he's not just saying inhabit the same space on planet Earth. But you think about this, and the King James, I think it says, dwell with her according to understanding. And that when I read that, I thought, wow, dwell with, that just reminded me of a passage in 2 Corinthians. And it's where Paul quotes Ezekiel, and the Lord said this. Well, I think I have it here. Let's put it up there. See what it says. God said, I will live with them. I will dwell with them, and I will walk among them, and I will be their God, and they will be my people. This was like the covenant promise that God gave in the Old Testament through, well, it's mentioned many, many times. I'm going to dwell with them. And of course, it's prophetic of Jesus. I'm going to walk among them. But it speaks more of just, it's not just I'm going to come and inhabit the same place they are, but I'm going to that dwell with them and walk among them. It just reminds me of a Middle Eastern market. When you're walking among the people, and if you haven't been to a Middle Eastern market, maybe you've been to a Latin American market, maybe you've been to a Mexican market, maybe you've been to what is called El Mercado, the thing in San Antonio that's kind of the Mexican market all set up. And when you're walking in those places, when you're walking in those markets, the Middle Eastern ones or the Mexican ones or the Guatemalan ones where we lived for a number of years, when you're walking in there, you're bumping up against people. The stuff is hanging out, the colorful fabrics and the leather works and all the stuff they make. And you're among the people. I mean, you're touching, you're sensing, you're smelling, you're tasting. You're hearing the same sounds, and you become a part of the people. When we would have people come on short-term mission trips, I'd always talk to them. I said, now, don't just be an observer, because so many people come on a mission trip like they're going to a zoo. And so they kind of look at the people from a distance and, oh, look at how happy they are. Oh, look at the monkeys. They're throwing little balls around. Aren't the monkeys happy, you know? It's like, don't do that. You know, get in with them. You know, if you're going to a children's home, kneel down and look those kids in the eye and grab hold their arms and touch them and play with them and get involved. Walk with them. Be among them. Dwell with them. That's what it's talking about here. He said, I will do that. And then, of course, it says, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among them. And so it's saying, don't just inhabit the same piece of ground on the earth, but live with them. And that means you're opening up to them. You're connecting with, you're sharing.
Relationship.
Yeah, it's a tighter relationship than just sharing the same ground. In other words, you don't just come home from work and I've had a hard day, so now I go into the garage or I sit on the couch and watch TV. I'm in my own little world, you know. But we're together. What do you mean we're not together? We're never together. Well, I'm here all the time. You know, no. It's much more than that. And guys, you may have encountered that. I know women need that. Guys, some of us are a little introverted, you know. We love our me time, my space, you know. But he's telling us, live together with them. Have that relationship, have that community. Dwell with them. And not just dwell with them, but how do you dwell with them? Dwell with them according to understanding, or with understanding. Now, I'm just so glad he didn't say, understand your wife. Because he didn't say that. He said, dwell with them according to understanding, or live with them in an understanding way, New American Standard, you know. If he had said, understand your wife, I would have thought of the Man of La Mancha. To dream the impossible dream. It's like, I don't think so. I am never going to understand this mysterious, marvelous, amazing creature that God gave as a gift to me. It's just beyond my comprehension. You know, it's just like I'm not going to understand the Trinity. I'm not going to understand a whole bunch of things. You know, my brain just can't wrap itself. This little finite cannot wrap itself around infinite, as John Calvin said. And I just am never going to understand her. But that's not what he said. He said, live with her in an understanding way. And I think then he goes on to maybe give us a little bit of insight, because it's like, okay, Peter, help me out here, man. What are you talking about? And I think he gives us a little insight, at least a good place to start. He says, as someone weaker, since she is a woman. Oh, so what he's saying is, the place to start is recognize she is different than you. And it's not just in her bodily construction. We all know that. We guys, we're very aware of that, right? But she is different than you. Now, our culture is trying to say there is no difference, but again, you're sadly ignorant if you feel like there's no difference between men and women other than a few bodily parts. We're constructed differently, we're built differently, we think differently, we communicate differently. In fact, in a few weeks, we are probably going to... Jan and I used to do many marriage seminars and things, like 2 and 3 day things, and I just love to do it. We worked with marriage for a while, pastoring, and we do this little thing where how men and women think differently, how our brains work differently, how we communicate differently. Men are headline, ladies are fine print. Men communicate facts and figures, women communicate emotions. And it's a very stereotype, but it gives some clear understanding of why. And so first of all, recognize she's a woman. She's not a man who has a few extra features. She is different. In fact, and you would think, well, duh, of course. We have a couple missionaries with us, and they were struggling in their marriage, and we had some time to spend some time with them. And he was a cop, married a cop, his first marriage. They married a cop, and when they got married, all of a sudden he realized she's different. And so now they ended up divorced. He came to know the Lord, met another woman. They got married, and they were struggling too, and they started going to some marriage classes. And so as he's sitting there, he's talking to me, he says, I realized my first wife, she was a cop. I'm a cop. We think the same way. He said, I thought she did things intentionally to irritate me. And he said, now I realize women are different than men. Yeah, you caught a good start, man. You're beginning to live with her according to understanding, That's the place you start. And then place 2 is to realize, Yes, she's different, but that doesn't mean she's broken. You don't need to fix her. And ladies, same thing. We're not broken, we're just different. We don't need to be fixed. In fact, the thing that drives you the craziest about your spouse is probably the thing that attracted you to them in the first place. Right? And our daughter, when they were getting married, she called me. She says, "Dad, now I know Mike and I, we're going to have some conflict and we're going to have some problems, but I just can't imagine what it's going to be. He's just so perfect." She says, "So what do you think is going to be our problems?" And they have gotten along very, very well. But I said, "Well, I can tell you what it is. What you like about him is he is so stable, and you're so spontaneous." We'll call it that.
He's very cautious.
He's very cautious. He's very thought out, and you're not. And that's what's going to drive you crazy about him. And sure enough, their first argument was they had gone into a mall, and there was a hemp store, I think it was. They were in Canada, gone into this mall, and she's just so excited about all this stuff. And he's still in the military at the time. He's a pilot in the Air Force at the time. And she's so excited about this stuff. And the guy who owns the place, we would call it a head shop, in the 70s. He's all excited to see somebody excited. So he says, "Hey, you want to try something?" She's like, "Yeah, what?" So he goes over there and he goes behind the counter and he pulls open this drawer and he pulls out this plastic bag and says, "Here, try some of this." And he gives it to her. She goes, "Oh, that's cool." And as they walk out into the mall, she goes, "There was something wrong with Mike. I couldn't tell what it was." She says, "Mike, what's wrong?" He goes, "Nothing." No, what's the matter? What's the matter? She goes, "Do you realize what you just did?" He goes, "Well, yeah. You just ate something that a guy gave you that you don't know you don't know what that was you put in you." And she goes, "That's okay. That's just her. It'll be all right." And that was the thing. He's very stable. He's very cautious. And we were so grateful when he came into her life. I mean, the other 2 or 3 guys that she was real interested in, we were saying, "Oh, Jesus, we'll tolerate it if this is your will, but we sure don't think it is." And when he came along, we thought, we didn't know there were still guys like this around. So praise God. I'm just saying, guys, keep praying. Ladies, keep praying.
And he's rubbed off on her a lot too.
Yeah, she's a lot more stable. She would probably still eat something handed to her from a guy in a plastic bag. But, so it hadn't, So again, she's not broken, she's just different. He's not broken, he's just different. And when we come together, if we value one another, then we balance one another out. If we're always trying to fix the other person and make them like us, if they became like you wouldn't like them. Because it's what was different about them that typically draws us together. So, live with her according to understanding that women are different than men. And now it says they're different in an understanding way. Let me see here. As someone who is weaker. Let's talk about that for a minute. Weaker since she is a woman. Okay, so obviously it is talking about physically weaker in that probably most of the guys in here, you could probably beat your wife at arm wrestling. Okay, like that's something really to be proud of, guys. So it does talk about a physical weakness, but one thing we need to recognize is, man, they are not weak. Think about childbearing. Somebody said, if men had the babies, which now, of course, we can. I don't know how, but they tell me you can, so.
It's on the internet.
It's on the internet. It's got to be true.
But I don't see you standing in line waiting.
I'm not standing in line, but they say if men could have babies, every family would be a one-child family. And I would take it further. I'd say most families would not have any kids, just because you begin thinking about I have something in my belly kicking me and hauling it around for 9 months, and then splitting me in half when it decides it's time to come into the world. That's just crazy, man. That is nuts. Us guys, we're too smart for that one, And if we did it once, we'd never do it again. You get away from me. So the point is, weaker maybe physically, but my goodness, they're definitely not weak. I read a deal somewhere where it said we are more fragile, not like a flower, like a bomb. You handle those bombs gently, right? So Yeah, women are more fragile, but maybe it is like a bomb, not like a fly. Anyway, we better get off of that. We're going to get in trouble here really soon. Okay, so the fact is that we usually are physically stronger, but Jesus talks about, Jesus demonstrated the way that physical strength and the purpose for that physical strength, and many, many times, and in fact, one of the illustrations that comes to my mind is, you remember at the Last Supper, he humbles himself, he goes around, he washes the disciples' feet, he kneels before them and washes their feet, humbling himself as a servant, and then he says to his disciples, he said, now, you guys call me Lord and Master. You call me the boss, you call me the jefe, you call me the guy who's in charge. I'm large and in charge, I'm that guy. You call me Lord, and well, you should, because I am. So he was letting him know, I'm in charge here. I got the power here. I've got the authority here. But if I humbled myself and washed your feet, you should do the same thing. I did this as an example for you. And so what he was demonstrating is the reason he could do that is because he knew he had the authority and he had the power. And so he could afford to humble himself because he knew he was the one in charge. And what it's saying is, when you are a man in charge, you use that power, you use that authority, you use that strength to serve others, to protect others. That God made us stronger, not so we could dominate, but so that we could be a protection for the weak, for the vulnerable, for women, for children, for not just women and children, but the mentally weak, the physically weak. God gave us that strength for his purposes to be a protection for others and not for dominance. And one of the things that we need to be protective of and toxic toward is anything that would threaten our families, threaten our wives, not just physically. We always think of the physical, but you're going to have many, many, many more threats coming to them emotionally and mentally. The philosophies of the world being shoved down their throats by government education, by television, by social media. And I know some parents are afraid to monitor their kids' phone uses. Well, I heard some parents say, well, I would be imposing on their privacy. No, you'd be stupid if you're just letting them watch whatever filth and garbage they're able to get on there. And I heard the other day there's a company that's suing an AI company because their son committed suicide. Apparently he developed this tight relationship with AI and whacked out and committed suicide, and they're suing the company. I go, well, I don't know how that's going to go. It'll be interesting, but where does the parent responsibility come in? Where was he doing this? In your home, under your supervision, and you allowed it to happen? Well, those are the things that we're to protect our families from. It's not just the physical, but we're to protect our families from anything that would pervert, corrupt, destroy, and a lot of it's worldly philosophies. That's the thing that's going to destroy them more than anything else. So, and give an example of that authority. Jesus used his power, he used his authority, he used his strength, his masculinity to endure the cross. He used his strength to set captives free. He will use his strength when he comes back. He came as the lamb the first time. When he comes back, he will be the lion of the tribe of Judah, and he will use his strength to establish a kingdom of righteousness and rule in righteousness on his throne. He uses his strength to protect and to serve and to help others. And so God made us stronger physically for the same purpose as that. And we're going to wrap up with this, because I just want to say there's another thing, another area where the weakness is demonstrated and the strength. And let's go back to that illustration we started with, where Paul says that as the church, as God is, as Christ is to the church, gave himself for the church to submit herself to Christ, and the husband lay down his life for his wife, submit to your husband. I just see a couple of little pictures of how that can carry out as well. In 1 Peter 5:6, a couple chapters later, we're going to get to this, 1 Peter 5:6, he says, humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, that he will exalt you in due time. Now, if you take that, and again, you apply it, he's saying to the church, you humble yourself under the hand of God. Well, just a few chapters earlier, where we are today in chapter 3, he says, wives, You humble yourself. You submit yourselves unto your husband. Okay? But what's God do then? God, in response to that, lifts us up, exalts us, and says, humble yourself under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time when the time is right. And so, guys, your wife, her responsibility, and it's not yours to make her do it, it's her responsibility to submit herself under your leadership. But don't you dare leave her there. It's your responsibility then to lift her up and exalt her and honor her and place her in a position of honor. Does that make sense? So a wife that is submitted to her husband is doing her part. But a guy who's going to be a godly man is going to exalt his wife. He's going to put her in a place of position and honor. Never diminish her before your children or in public or anywhere else. You're always honoring, you're always lifting her up, you're always speaking well of her. And I know it's kind of the cool thing to, talk about your wife. I don't hang around with people like that because Psalms 101 tells me, don't do that. Don't hang around with people like that. But it's a kind of a cool thing in the world to diminish your wife. My old lady's this or whatever, And I go, man, if you speak that way of her, what are you saying about you? You picked her, dude. What's wrong with your brain? If you pick somebody such a loser as that, you're just diminishing yourself is what you're doing. So I don't hang around with those kind of people. But our position is to lift our wife up, to honor her, to give her a place of respect in our eyes and in the eyes of those around us. And so we see that in humble yourself under the mighty hand of God. Another one is this parable Jesus told. If you remember, he saw men scrambling to get the best seat at the table. And he said, don't do that. He said, instead, take the seat at the foot of the table. And then when the master comes in, when the host of the dinner comes in, he'll say, what are you doing way down here? Come on up here. Hey, you get out of the way. Let my friend sit here. He said, then you'll be honored before everybody. And I'm thinking, that's a great example, too, of a husband. The wife, she humbles herself. I'm not trying to put myself forward. I'm not trying to make myself look good. I'm just going to sit down here. I'm going to serve. And the wise man says, hey, you're not going to be down there. You come up here. And in front of everybody, he publicly honors her. And so we see this idea of the reflection of the church to Christ and Christ to the church can be carried throughout every instruction, I think, given to the church. The wife humbles herself, and God exalts those. God wants to lift you up. God helps you to prosper. God blesses you. God brings good things into your life, sowing and reaping, when you honor him. And so we see again this idea of living with her according to knowledge, someone weaker. And we're going to next week talk about that weaker, because it also has another, not physically weaker, but it also has the idea of being more finely tuned.